I used to work the night shift at the front desk of an apartment building. The lobby area had a desk, and I was in charge of buzzing people in through the door. I was essentially a layer of security, ensuring that whoever was coming into the building lived there, or was a friend of somebody who had received approval to enter. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so there wasn't usually much action during my shift, especially after midnight. One night, in the middle of my shift, I was trying not to fall asleep when suddenly I saw movement on one of the cameras from the garage. The garage was attached to the building, but to get inside, you still needed to come up to the main doors and be buzzed in by me. Someone was walking through the garage towards the stairs that would take them towards the lobby area. I hadn't seen anybody drive into the garage and park their car, but I was pretty tired and could have easily missed it. I watched as the person entered the stairs and made their way up towards the door to get into the lobby. They immediately tugged to open the door, apparently not knowing that they had to be buzzed in by me. It was a younger man, maybe right around his 30s. He looked in at me through the glass, motioning for me to open the door. It was clear that he did not live here, so I walked over towards the entry doors, motioning for him to leave. The man started explaining that he was here to see his friend and needed to get in. I had received no warning about this man, and there was no note that would indicate that he was supposed to be granted access to the building. The man glared angrily at me when I once again said that I wasn't going to be letting him in. He began pounding on the door, and while his arms were raised, I saw that he had a gun tucked into his waistband as well. The man was quite strong, and I was genuinely worried that the glass might break. I scurried back to my desk, alerting the authorities and letting them know that a man with a gun was attempting to enter the apartment building. After a few moments, the man stopped pounding on the glass and once again glared at me. He shouted that he would be back and disappeared down the stairway back towards the garage. I watched on the cameras as he exited the garage and disappeared outside into the night. I ended up only working that night shift a couple more weeks, not seeing the man again. I have no idea if he ever showed up overnight again since I had stopped working there, but I wished the next night shift worker good luck if they ever did or do see him again. I spend the nights working as a security officer. My job is to travel around to various buildings, mostly businesses that hire my company for security. I swing by each of these places multiple times at night, ensuring that nothing funny is going on and the building is secure. Honestly, my job is really boring, as you can picture that on a night-to-night basis. Not much is going on around an office building. I'm required to walk around each entry point to the building, making sure that it's locked and secure. I have keys to all these buildings in case I need to go inside, but in the 3 months working this night shift, I never had to go inside a building. However, that all changed during a shift I had 2 weeks ago. I had reached my third building of the night, which was a smaller 4-story office building. I made my rounds around the perimeter of the building, shining my light up at windows, ensuring they were intact, and pulling on doors, making sure they were locked. I circled around to the backside of the building when I did. I was shocked to see that a door was not only unlocked but also propped open. I never had to deal with a situation like this before, and, quite frankly, I was nervous to go inside the building. I maneuvered my way through the building, moving very slowly and shining my flashlight into every room and corner. It took me a while, especially since I was nervous, but I made my way through all 4 floors of the building without seeing anything unusual. I made my way back to the door that had been left open, removing the prop in the door and locking it behind me. I continued my rounds, making my way through the rest of the buildings that needed to be checked for the night. I decided to head back over to the office building that I had walked through earlier to make sure that everything was okay. I pulled my truck into the parking lot and began walking around the building, doing rounds once more. To my surprise, the same back exit was once again unlocked and propped open. At this point, I was very confused. There wasn't supposed to be anyone still in the building this late, and there were no lights inside that I could see. I reluctantly entered the office building once again and searched it from top to bottom, this time even calling out multiple times to see if anyone was there. Once again, I saw and heard nothing unusual my entire trip throughout the building. I returned to the back exit and saw that the door was now closed. I hadn't unpropped the door when I first entered the building, but now the door was closed and the brick that had been used to prop it open was nowhere in sight. Again, this was my first time having to enter a building while I had this job, so I was a little scared at this point. I quickly locked the door and hurried back to the safety of my truck. Nobody was supposed to be in that building, so I was relieved that I hadn't ended up seeing anybody during my rounds of the building. It was eerie to me, though, that during both of my searches at the building, somebody had been in there somewhere, evading me and then slipped out the back door without me seeing them. I called the office building the next day, asking if anything important was missing or had been stolen, but nothing they were aware of was gone. I still currently work the security night shift job, but haven't had any nights like that one at the office building since then. I'm retired now, but for a couple of years in my 50s, I worked a night shift in a mall. I was a custodian and would come in and clean once the mall had closed for the night. Most of my nights were spent cleaning up the food court areas, as well as taking care of bathrooms. One night I was sweeping the floor in the food court area, and I heard a fit of coughing coming from somewhere. I looked around the dimly lit food court area but didn't see anyone. A couple of times throughout my years working there, I would discover somebody or a group of people who had hidden in the mall and were doing a challenge of staying there overnight. I didn't see anyone and heard no further noises, so I just continued cleaning. If someone was trying to stay in the mall overnight, I'd see them eventually unless they stayed put in one spot the entire time. About 15 minutes had passed and I was wiping off tables. Suddenly, a series of loud bangs startled me. I looked up and saw that a whole table and all the surrounding chairs had been knocked over onto the ground. I walked over to the items on the ground, which had happened near the edge of the food court. There was no one to be seen anywhere. I ventured down away from the food court a bit to see if I could see anyone running away or hiding. I was about to turn around back to the food court when I heard water running inside the women's bathroom. All the bathrooms at the mall had sinks that were motion sensors. Someone had to be inside of the bathroom, and I had a feeling that it was going to be the culprit I was looking for from the food court. The sink was still running as I slowly and as quietly as I could entered the bathroom. As I turned the corner into the bathroom, the water abruptly stopped running. There was nobody anywhere to be seen. I checked every stall and still nothing. I chalked it up to a faulty sensor on the sink and decided that I'd put in a work order for maintenance to fix it. Oddly enough, as I walked away from the bathroom, I heard the sink turn on again. I walked back to the food court very confused and also a little spooked. I went about the rest of my night as usual, finishing my cleaning duties. A couple of days later, I received an email from maintenance that there had been nothing wrong with the sink sensor and that it was functioning normally. From then on, at least once a week, I would hear the water running from the sink in that bathroom. For the rest of the time that I worked at the mall, I just accepted that I wasn't alone in that mall and stayed away from that bathroom. I never had any more incidents with the mysterious knocking over tables and chairs in the food court. Thankfully, that spirit or whatever it was stayed in the women's bathroom. I used to work night shift security, and by far the scariest thing I ever encountered was when I chanced upon a robbery in progress. I was patrolling one of our assets around the start of my shift at 10 p.m., walking around the perimeter of the building. Everything looked in order except an air conditioner near ground level that had fallen out of place. The air conditioner didn't fit well in the hole, so there had been a wooden plank to prop it up and keep it in place. I assumed that the stick had somehow been nudged and the AC unit had fallen out of place. It wasn't very heavy, so I propped the air conditioner back into its hole in the wall, positioning the stick to keep it in place. I continued my walk around the building, reaching the next window, and to my surprise, someone was there. The light in the room wasn't on, but there was a bit of light entering the room from the hallway that the office space was connected to. It wasn't uncommon for a worker to be working late on a project or either use their code to re-enter the building and grab something they had forgotten earlier. I pressed my face to the glass to see who it was and if I would recognize them. Once I was peering through the glass, I could make out that it definitely wasn't an office worker. The person was wearing a ski mask over their face. They noticed my face pressed up against the window and hustled out of the room. Realizing that a robbery was in progress, I quickly put 2 and 2 together, figuring out that the fallen air conditioning unit hole was most likely the way they had entered the building. I immediately pressed a button on my phone in an app that my company used to notify police if they needed to send cars to my location. I was still standing only about 100 feet away from the AC unit, so I ran over to see if that was going to be how the perpetrator would attempt to escape. Sure enough, shortly after I had reached the AC unit, it came flying out at me as the intruder pushed it forcefully from inside. The AC unit was knocked straight backwards into my chest, and I watched as the person in the ski mask flew through the hole in the wall, barreling into me and the AC unit that I had somehow managed to catch. The suspect ran into a nearby neighborhood, but the police arrived soon after and had them cornered in a city block, shutting down the entire street and eventually capturing them. It felt good to say that I had stopped an attempted robbery in progress, but I'll never forget the image of the person flying through a dark hole in the wall directly into me. It was quite terrifying, and I had nightmares about it for the next couple of nights. I worked at a hotel for many years when I was younger. I eventually got promoted and earned better pay and shift hours, but when I first started working there, I was on the night shift. The night shift was from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., and the only workers in the building would be me and another person working at the front desk check-in area. The hotel wasn't a 5-star hotel by any means, but it was fairly nice. Most people we encountered and checked in during the middle of the night weren't problematic. One night at about 2 a.m., a grumpy-looking middle-aged man came in asking for a hotel room for the night. We got him set up with his room and then asked for the payment before giving him his room keys. He informed us that he wasn't able to pay currently, but would pay before he left in the morning. We clearly weren't allowed to do that, so we informed him that he could either pay for his room now or he wouldn't be allowed to stay here. The man got quite angry and proceeded to cuss us out. The other guy I was working with that night, who was much more confrontational than I am, stepped out from behind the front desk, telling the man to leave or he'd make him leave. I was about ready to call the cops when all of a sudden, the man took off into the hotel, running down the hallway. Both of us workers jogged out into the hallway a bit to see him enter a stairway and appear to head downstairs towards the hotel's basement. The hotel's basement was already creepy enough as it was, being much older than the rest of the hotel and having a bunch of storage stacked high everywhere. My coworker wanted me to go down there with him, but as I said, it was already creepy enough without the possibility of a crazy man down there. I called the cops, and they came to search the basement, where they found the man hiding in the storage area with a knife in his hand. They were able to detain him without anybody getting hurt. I'm so glad that I didn't let my coworker talk me into going down there. Who knows what the man would have done if it had only been us two to find him down there instead of a group of police officers. We didn't get any more shady characters like that during the time that I was on the night shift, but I still felt a bit relieved when I got promoted and was able to work regular hours during the daytime. I used to work at a video store in Los Angeles in the 90s. We had quite a few celebrity customers, including some porn stars. It was a wacky work environment that could feel pretty unsafe at times, but that unpredictability was half of the allure. I honestly loved the job and the crazy, unhinged customers that came with it. There was a porn star who would come in frequently. I'll call her T, whose visits I would absolutely dread. She only seemed to come in when I was working alone. She would always ask me the same question: which of my movies do you carry? Now, she didn't ask this in any kind of unreasonable manner. T was a little older, clearly had a whole career behind her. She looked and acted a little crazy, like she was out of her mind, but she was also very obviously high. She'd come in grinding her teeth together, and her eyes would bulge out of her head like they were some prosthetic special effect. She was skinny from years of substance abuse and probably various personal issues with weight and image. She also reeked of booze and cigarettes most of the time. She would scream, "Which of my movies do you carry?" over and over again with that crackhead energy. I repeatedly told her that our computer system would only look up movies by title, not by actors or actresses, but this fact never seemed to get through to her. Every time she would start screaming at me. Remember, this was around 1995, so the computer I used to look up things and check rentals was a dinosaur. But it didn't really matter because T would always forget. "How in the hell can you find out which of my movies you have?" she would scream. I offered to walk her back to the adult section so she could see the stock on the shelves for herself, but she would always scoff, totally disgusted at that idea. This was bewildering because she was a porn star who had already come into the adult film store. "I'm not going in there," she yelled. "Lady, you're already in here. What's it going to hurt to go scan the shelves real quick?" In my head, I'm thinking she's a porn star and won't walk the aisles and look at the covers. It made me think she was even crazier than she was letting on. What did she think she'd find in there? Just how out of touch with reality was this woman anyway? She would yell at me for a bit before calming down and then leaving, but this scene played out at least a dozen times. She wasn't the worst customer I had, but she became the one that I dreaded the most. Then, one week, she didn't show up. Monday, Tuesday, the whole week went by and still no tea. It was a huge relief, but part of me wondered if something bad happened to her. Was she getting extra spun out and would come in even crazier? The reasonable side of me figured she had moved on. Another week went by without her presence, and she left my mind entirely. Fast forward a month or so. Guess who comes slithering through the double doors? It's T, and she looks like hell. First off, she clearly hasn't showered for several weeks, maybe since the last time I saw her. You could always tell when she was really unwashed because her hair would just get more and more vertical. I don't know how else to explain it other than the grease would just hold up this overly dyed, frazzled hair. Her clothes were about the same as always, nightwear and half-sporty valet mom. All of this is nothing when I see her face though. She has a huge black eye, and her eyes themselves are just completely insane. She's got pupils like dinner plates, and the outer rim, instead of white, is tinged with a deep yellow. I can't tell if she's sick or more hungover than any human I've ever seen. She comes to the counter and sparks up that same shtick she always does. What movies do you have? Where are they? How many copies? I try to be a little personable and say, hey T, it's been a while since I've seen you. We still don't have an updated system that allows me to search those specifics. I can show you the shelves that might help you though. I'll never forget the look she gave me, just this faraway nod, half smile with her mouth all jittery. She asked me if I was sure, to which I said yes. Then she started backing up towards the exit. Unsure of what was going on, I figured she was in the middle of an episode. She'd see herself out and probably disappear for another few weeks. I'd heard of mentally ill people being stuck in loops of behavior. Maybe visiting the video store was part of her loop. Boy, how wrong was I. The door opens not 30 seconds later, and a big, tall, sharp-dressed guy strolls in. I extend a welcome but hesitate. This guy looks pissed. He's storming right up to the counter. I ask if there's anything I can help him with. He sets his hands on the countertop, and they're bling-studded with all kinds of gold and silver, crusted diamonds in between them. He calmly explains that I'm the problem, and that he's here as a solution. I start to come back with something about how I'm just at work, just an employee here. If he wants the cash in the register or the pornos in the back, he can have them. The guy laughs at me, shakes his head, then explains that I'm just upsetting his friend who was just in here. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. T, the crazy cracked-out porn star who's been pestering me for months, somehow secured backup. I tell him that I don't know her at all. She's just a needy customer who wants to find her films. There's not an easy way for me to do that, so she'll just have to look over the titles herself. This guy cuts me off with a wave of his hand, says he knows. He's heard every word. He's heard it so many times that he feels like it's happening to him, and now he needs to get involved. It turns out T was pretty much what I pegged her for. This guy was clearly gang or drug related, maybe even a kingpin. He acted like he was T's handler, almost like a pimp or something. She was so old there was no way he had her tricking. I mean, I guess there's a market for anything, but I got more of the vibe that he had a relationship with her and for himself. Whatever the case, it's now my problem. I'm looking up at this Coke machine of a man, deciding if I should hit the security button. This is just a video store, so part of me didn't even think that would work. But it was down at the other end of the counter, and if I moved, this guy was going to snatch me up for sure. He states T's full name, then her stage name. They were similar, probably more similar than you'd want them to be. I realized then that T was probably pretty easy to look up in the phone book if you were clever enough. He then asked me, which movies do you have with her in them? Obviously, he didn't want the same excuses I'd given before, so I threw my hands up in defeat. I logged into the computer beside me, pulled up the inventory list of the entire store, and started doing it the old-fashioned way. I jotted down a short list of titles that I recognized and just started from there. It took me almost an hour to find every single tape, constantly double-checking the shelves and discount racks for hidden copies. The whole time, that guy just casually followed me around, not saying a word, just watching me gather them all up in a tub on the counter. He'd crack his knuckles, roll his neck, textbook intimidation stuff. It was like a scene from Goodfellas. It was only after I started to pile up all the tapes that I realized just how extensive T's career was. She was a mainstream actress for like 20 years, from what I could tell, and had been produced by some of the bigger studios throughout the decades. It occurred to me that this crackhead burnout probably still received checks for some of this stuff. Now the guy behind me made sense. As I said, I did it. That was it. I told him it'd take me a minute to wring them all out. He asked what I meant by that. I said a charge for all the films. I explained I couldn't just let 80 or 90 tapes disappear from our store. The guy picks up the bin of movies with one arm, slides a pistol out of his waistband with the other, looks me up and down, sets the barrel on the counter, then asks me if we're good. I just nod with a sigh, tell him to take care. I called my boss after I saw them leave the parking lot, who in turn told me to call the police. Both of them showed up 20 minutes later. The police took a statement, and my boss filed a report of robbery, then fired me right there on the spot. I thought a lot about that guy, who he was, and why they wanted those movies. It was a cool and clear evening, the kind where the air is crisp and the stars are bright. I had just finished a late shift at the diner and decided to take a different route home to enjoy the serene night. My usual path felt too mundane for such a beautiful evening. I took a detour through the park, which was dimly lit but familiar to me. The stillness of the park was comforting, and I felt a sense of peace as I walked along the winding paths. As I approached the playground, I noticed a figure sitting on one of the swings. It was unusual to see someone there so late, but I didn't think much of it. Drawing closer, I saw that it was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She looked distressed, with her head hung low and her shoulders slumped. Feeling a pang of concern, I decided to approach her and see if she needed help. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked gently, not wanting to startle her. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed her. I didn't want to press her, but I felt compelled to offer some comfort. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Sometimes it helps to share," I suggested, taking a seat on the swing next to her. She was silent for a moment, then began to speak haltingly. "I feel so lost," she confessed. "Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do." Her voice cracked, and she wiped away a tear. I listened as she poured out her troubles: a recent breakup, financial struggles, and the pressure of school. She felt overwhelmed and alone. I offered words of encouragement, sharing some of my own experiences and how I had managed to overcome similar challenges. As we talked, I could see a change in her demeanor. Her shoulders relaxed, and she began to smile faintly. We sat there for what felt like hours, just talking and sharing stories. Eventually, she thanked me for listening and said she felt much better. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I really needed someone to talk to." I smiled and told her it was no problem at all. We parted ways, and I continued my walk home, feeling a sense of fulfillment. Helping her had reminded me of the importance of compassion and connection. It was a night I wouldn't soon forget, a reminder that sometimes all we need is someone to listen. It was a typical Monday morning. I was running late for work, rushing through my usual routine. As I dashed out the door, I realized I had forgotten my phone inside. I hurried back, grabbed it, and sprinted to the bus stop, hoping I hadn't missed my bus. Fortunately, the bus was a few minutes late, giving me just enough time to catch it. I boarded quickly, found an empty seat, and settled in for the ride. The bus was crowded, as usual, with people glued to their phones or staring out the windows. I pulled out my phone to check my messages and emails. About 10 minutes into the ride, the bus came to an abrupt halt. The driver announced that there was an accident ahead, and we would be delayed. Frustrated, I sighed and looked out the window. Traffic was at a standstill, and there was no way to know how long we'd be stuck. As I waited, I noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry her shopping bags. She was trying to make her way through the crowded bus, but no one seemed to notice or offer to help. Feeling a pang of guilt, I stood up and walked over to her. "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like some help with your bags?" I asked politely. She looked up, surprised, and smiled gratefully. "Oh, thank you, dear," she replied. "That would be wonderful." I took the bags from her and helped her find a seat. She thanked me again and struck up a conversation. We chatted for the rest of the bus ride. She told me about her family, her grandchildren, and her life in the city. Her stories were captivating, and I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. She had a warmth and kindness that made me feel at ease. Finally, the bus began moving again, and we reached our destination. I helped her off the bus and carried her bags to her apartment building, which was a few blocks away. She thanked me profusely and insisted on giving me a small token of appreciation, a homemade cookie she had baked that morning. I smiled and accepted the cookie, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Helping her had turned my frustrating morning into a pleasant and memorable experience. As I walked to work, I couldn't help but think about how small acts of kindness can make a big difference in someone's day. I work at a gas station in the center of my town. My shifts aren't always the same, but I find myself on overnights and early mornings most of the time. I'd been there for a whole year at this point, and honestly, I didn't have many negative things to say about it. It was just a normal mid-paying job that only required me to stand in one spot for 8 hours and talk to the occasional customer. On this day, I was working an overnight shift, the typical 10 to 6. Although it's usually not too busy overnight on weekdays, it's worth mentioning that it was raining a decent amount this night, so I was expecting it to be a pretty quiet night. The first couple of hours, I sat in a chair behind the register and just waited for anyone to come in. I got a few people who paid for gas with cash, but by 12:30 or 1-ish, it was pretty much dead. No customers were coming inside and barely anyone was even getting gas outside. With absolutely no customers, I went around the counter and started fixing up the shelves a bit. They weren't too bad, but it was just a way to keep myself busy. As I was doing this, I had my back facing the windows, but I saw headlights glare through the store as someone pulled into the pumping stations. I didn't look because there was nothing interesting about it, just some guy pulling in to get gas. I kept on tidying up the shelves for maybe 10 or so minutes before I unconsciously glanced out the window. The car was still there by one of the pumps, with a man standing right next to it. As soon as I looked, the man shifted away, making it obvious that he was looking at me. After seeing that, I felt really weirded out, especially since they'd been there supposedly pumping gas for a whole 10 minutes. I went back to the counter, then checked out the window again 30 seconds later, seeing the man getting in his car. The headlights flashed a few times like he was trying and failing to turn it on, but he eventually got it running and drove away in a hurry. I stood there and just looked out the window for a minute, and something just really didn't seem right. I got an idea and pulled up the recent transactions for the pump he was at. The last time it was used was hours ago. He was there for 10 minutes, with no reason at all other than watching me through the windows. I stayed behind the counter for a while, trying to just wait out the rest of my shift. A few more cars came and went, and then it got really quiet again for a while. Around 3 a.m., I heard something outside. The rain was heavy, but a rhythmic shuffling noise on the ground was barely audible through it, footsteps right along the side of the building, moving toward the back. I tried to look out the window, but there was no good view. I did notice that no cars were in the parking lot or by the pumps though. I quickly left the counter and went to the back door, which was a heavy metal door that had no windows or anything on it. I pressed my ear against it and listened as the footsteps got louder and louder until they were right on the other side of the door. My eyes moved to the handle, waiting in the silence before the handle turned slowly and slightly, but it got caught by the lock. It went quiet again for almost a whole minute. Then a man's voice grunted in frustration as a sudden sharp sound slid across the other side of the door. Footsteps followed soon after, leaving and going back to the side of the gas station. I ran back to the front, waiting to see them walking away, but didn't get any sight of them. Acting quickly, I picked up the store phone and dialed 911, hoping they could catch him before he got too far. I didn't know what was really happening, but someone trying to get in through the back door had to have intended something bad. When the cops arrived, they didn't find the man, but they did find a car on the side of the road less than a quarter-mile away, the same car I'd seen earlier with the man who was watching me. It had run out of gas and had mismatching license plates. It turned out to be a stolen car from 2 states over. The other thing they found was a long scrape across the back door made by a sharp metal object, likely a knife. Knowing all these details, I think I actually got extremely lucky, as the man was probably on the run already and could have been planning something bad. For the past couple of years, I've had the same job. I'm a janitor for a popular fast food restaurant. I don't take orders or do anything aside from cleaning. I don't even see other workers a lot of the time because I'm scheduled overnight. At the restaurant, everything needs to be deep cleaned every day, and during open hours, it's basically impossible to do. I'd never had anything happen during my shifts aside from the occasional customer knocking on the window asking if we're open. On this night, I came in and got to work like I usually did. A couple of other employees were still there when I got there, but by 10, which was an hour after closing, it was just me for the rest of the night. I popped in my headphones and started scraping the grills and prepping everything that needed to be hosed down. After a while, I lost track of time, but my best guess is that it was around 12 a.m. when I heard a knock at the front of the building. I pulled off my headphones, hearing it again. I walked to the front, expecting someone at the door, wanting to see if we were closed, but when I looked, nobody was there. I went up to the door and looked out at the parking lot, no cars or people. I knew I'd heard it from this side of the building though, so I waited for it again, but there was nothing. I ended up thinking I just mistook another sound for knocking and went back to work. Another hour or so went by, and then I took a lunch break. I grabbed my lunch bag and sat at one of the tables in the middle of the dining area, taking my time since I was actually ahead on my cleaning. Once I finished eating, I went to the back and turned to grab the mop, only to see a man's face staring at me from outside the drive-through window. He had messy hair and a blank face, but his eyes had something strange about them, like they were empty. I froze up for a second, and after a moment, the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was racing in my chest, and I just stood in place, listening to his departing footsteps. I didn't know what to think. It was just incredibly creepy and strange. Once I got my confidence back, I opened the window and looked out to make sure he left. It was dark beyond the light of the restaurant, but I didn't see anyone, so I closed it up and locked it. I was on edge for the next hour, constantly looking behind me at the windows, feeling like I was being watched. But as my shift was coming to an end, I started to feel some relief, and the anxiety calmed down. One of the last few things I had to do was roll all the garbage bags out to the dumpster, which I was avoiding as long as I could. I checked the window before I stepped out, and it looked clear, so I quickly opened the door and got the garbage out. I started tossing them one by one into the dumpster, but not even 20 seconds in, the man appeared from around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and quickly asked what he needed. He didn't respond as he walked up to me and had that same empty stare. Now that I could see his whole body though, he was even more terrifying, being a fairly large man and wearing a dirty and stained coat. Not knowing what else to do, I ran for the door. I opened it as the man's footsteps rushed up behind me, and as I slammed the door shut, the man was able to stick his arm into the gap, preventing it from closing. I turned and sprinted to the other end of the restaurant, getting my keys out and unlocking the front door as fast as I could while hearing the man closing the distance on me. I barely got away and ran before he got to me. I sprinted across the parking lot and as far as I could while calling the police. 5 minutes later, the police got to the restaurant. The man was gone. We got footage on the CCTVs, but no identity could be made of it. It also showed that as soon as I ran away, the man just stayed there and watched me for a bit, then left out the back door. What he wanted from me is unknown, but his creepy and objectively horrifying behavior gives me chills even to this day. I was working late at the office one night. We have a big 2-story building in a business complex, and sometimes if we have to catch up on work, we kind of have to stay late. I had taken 2 sick days the week before, so I really had to get my project done and didn't have much time left to do it. I planned to stay a few hours this night and a few hours the next night to get caught up, leaving anywhere between 1 and 2 a.m. Often others would be there late as well, but this night it was just me. I was working at my desk, which was in the middle of a room full of desks. As I typed away on my laptop, I started to get a little drowsy. After fighting it for a bit, I got up to make some coffee in the break room. I started the machine and leaned against the table, barely keeping my eyes open as it slowly poured into the mug. A sudden thud shook me awake. It sounded like it was downstairs, but it was really loud, resonating through the whole building. Nothing followed the sound though, it was just the one thud. I walked over to the doorway and looked out at the stairs, debating whether or not to see what it was. Honestly, I was so tired I thought it had to just be something falling in one of the rooms downstairs and chose not to investigate. I grabbed my mug and went back to my desk, continuing to work. I sat there for an hour non-stop working, but the coffee really wasn't fixing my sleepiness problem. I kept working, trying to power through it, but I was only prolonging the inevitable. At some point, I dozed off at my desk. When my eyes opened, I remember being immediately irritated and somewhat dizzy, like I'd been annoyingly woken up from a deep sleep. As I regained my senses, I noticed a sound coming from somewhere in the building. It was a beep, sounding every 4 or 5 seconds, but very faint. I looked at my laptop. Seeing it was nearly 2 a.m., I decided it wasn't worth trying to work anymore. So I packed up my things and brought them with me as I left the room to both check on the beeping and to leave afterwards. As I got to the stairwell, the beeping started to make me nervous. I'd never heard it before, and there was something eerie about it. Maybe I was too tired before to fully comprehend it. I walked down the staircase, and now with the beeping much louder, I peered into the long main hallway. At the far end, there was a metal rod laying on the ground right in front of the open entrance door. I felt blood rush from my face, knowing it should be locked up and realizing the beeping was from the building's security system. With nothing but instinct to go off of, I ran to the opposite end of the hallway and out the back door, getting in my car to call for help. Although I was out of the building, what I learned next was far more terrifying. Police pulled in and searched around, not finding anyone or anything. When we checked the security cameras at 11 p.m., a man could be seen walking up and breaking the door open with a single hit from some kind of tool, creating the bang sound that I heard while getting coffee. He then quietly moved around the first floor and up to the second, where he came into the office I was in and stood quietly only a few feet behind me while I was working at my desk. He then went back downstairs, coming up again while I was sleeping, and walked around the whole office, even going right up to me and searching around my desk. It's not clear if he stole anything, as there weren't cameras in every room, but there didn't seem to be any obvious answer as to what he was doing there. After seeing the security tapes, I've never stayed alone at that office again. When it comes to the graveyard shift, almost every employee tries to avoid it. But on the other hand, the night shift pays more than the day shift. When I joined the local coffee shop as a barista, I expected a lot of creepy strangers to come my way. Drunk dudes who try to hit on you and crazy old ladies that scream at you for no reason soon became a daily dose of my entertainment. The coffee shop is generally operated by a drive-through during the day. Apart from me, there was another girl named Susie. Susie and I became good friends in very little time. She was always jolly and went the extra mile to serve the customers. I admired her level of patience in handling rude and creepy customers. But one night, when Susie was stuck at home with a fever, I was assigned to pull the all-nighter. The owner offered me double pay, hence I couldn't resist. After quite a rush until midnight, the arrival of customers started to loosen up. Having a little break, I went to the back of the shop to smoke in peace. When I returned, I saw a car waiting near the drive-through window. A tall man was lunging from the passenger seat window, peeking inside the drive-through. I quickly got in, apologizing in a polite tone. "Welcome to Super Coffee, sir." "Sorry to keep you waiting." Once he saw me, he went back to his seat. I stood near the window and asked, "What would you like to order, sir?" "Where were you?" he asked. I went to take the trash out." Suddenly he came real close to my face and started smelling in a very creepy way. He sniffed me like a dog and then let out a huge grin. "Why do you smell like cigarettes then?" By this point, I was going through so many emotions. His face was probably inches away from mine. "I'm sorry, sir. I just went to take a break that he could report me for smoking on duty, and keeping him waiting seemed more important than his cringy behavior." I just stood silently with a sad face. "Don't worry, I won't report you." He slowly went back into his car and gave his order. I smiled awkwardly, but felt a little relieved that he at least understood my situation. While the coffee was getting done, the man continued chatting with me, and this is where things started to take a dark turn. He took out a small fishing hook from his pocket and began picking his teeth with it. As disgusting as the sight was, I tried to look away. "So what time do you get off?" he asked. He read my name tag tucked in my uniform with too much attention. "Late in the morning," I replied. "Sir." "Stop calling me sir." Do I look that old? Honestly, he did, but I continued his rant to be safe and not push him to report me. "I didn't mean that, sir." "So what do you do after you go home? Do you shower?" "Excuse me? What?" "Come on, no need to be mad. It's just a basic question." I don't think I need to answer that I poured his coffee and placed it right in the window. "Here's your coffee. That'll be $2.70. "Don't you think you should hand me that coffee yourself?" His voice changed, and I got goosebumps. With shaking hands, I grabbed the cup and raised it toward him. He suddenly grabbed my hand and smashed the coffee cup. Hot, boiling coffee splashed on my skin and his too. "What are you doing?" Our hands were burning, but surprisingly there weren't any signs of pain on his face. He stared through his cold, dead eyes and let the coffee burn our skin. "Leave me, you freak." "Let me go." He pulled me closer to him and said in a low but scary voice, "I don't like girls who think they're better than me." That was the end of my tolerance level. I slapped him and kept punching him to let go of me, but slowly he pulled me into his car right from the drive-through window. I heard a car horn when my body was halfway out the window, and the man immediately let go of my hand. Without waiting a second more, he started the car engine and fled the scene. I broke down crying, holding my burnt hand. The next day, I returned to the drive-thru and reported it to the owner. I asked him to see the security footage, but he said the CCTV camera needed fixing. So that means there's no evidence of what he did to me. I was mad and hurt, but the owner, instead of helping me, blamed me for leaving the shop to go for a smoke. He didn't care about the safety of his employee. I was so furious that I quit the job right away. Susie was standing there when I was leaving. She consoled me for what happened and told me to take care. I hugged her one last time and said to be careful while working the graveyard shift here. I kept in touch with her after that. She told me the owner had fixed the security camera 2 days after I left. I warned Susie about this man but never thought he would have the guts to return. 1 week after this incident, I got a call from Susie's boyfriend. He said Susie hadn't come home since last night. She was doing her night shift at the coffee shop and was supposed to return home after work but never showed up. That's when an awful feeling hit me. Did something happen to her? Then one day I saw it on the news. Susie's dead body had been found, and her killer was none other than the same man from that night. He kidnapped her and killed her in the garage of his home. The most horrifying thing was the ransom picture he sent to Susie's parents. He staged her body like a living person. What kind of sick psycho does that? The story you just read is loosely based on the bone-chilling murder story of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. She was working her night shift at the Common Grounds coffee stand in downtown Anchorage. As she was finishing her shift, the young barista was approached by a man later identified as a serial killer named Israel Keys. Keys hid his face under a ski mask. He threatened Samantha with a gun and took her to his property. He then tied her in a shed and used the radio to cover up her screams for help. Keys poured a glass of wine, drank it in front of Samantha, and then strangled her with a rope, leaving her body in the shed. Keys flew to New Orleans for a 2-week vacation with his family. After returning from his vacation, Keys decided to take Samantha's ransom photo to get money from her parents. While she had already died by this time, Keys ensured to show her alive in the photo. He sewed her eyelids open with fishing line, braided her hair, and applied makeup to her face. Keys then propped the body against the wall and took the picture. He called the photo proof of life, indicating that the victim wasn't harmed by him. Keys was arrested in 2012 by the FBI. In his chilling interview, he explained how he chose his victims. The days were getting darker and gloomier as winter set in. The strong winds in the small town of Bennington, Vermont, made the chill unbearable. My wife, Julie, and I had recently moved into our new home, an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. We thought it would be the perfect place to start a family. The house had been vacant for years, and it took us a lot of effort to clean it up and make it livable. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of unpacking, Julie and I were sitting in the living room, enjoying a cup of hot cocoa by the fireplace. The wind howled outside, and the house creaked with every gust. Suddenly, we heard a faint knocking sound. Julie looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Yeah, probably just the wind," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. The knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I got up and followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from the basement. As I descended the stairs, the temperature dropped significantly, and I could see my breath in the cold, damp air. I reached the bottom and turned on the light. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes left by the previous owners. The knocking had stopped, but I felt a strange presence. I shook off the feeling and went back upstairs, assuring Julie that it was nothing. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the knocking sound in my head. The next morning, I decided to check the basement again. This time, I noticed a small door hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was padlocked. "Julie, come down here," I called out. "What is it?" she asked, joining me in the basement. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the door. "Do you think we should open it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We need to know what's inside," I replied. I grabbed a crowbar and pried the padlock open. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a small, dark room. The air inside was stale, and the room was filled with old newspapers and photographs. As we sifted through the clutter, we found a diary. The entries were dated back to the 1920s and told the story of a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house with her husband and children. Margaret's diary revealed a series of tragic events. Her husband had gone mad and murdered their children before taking his own life. Margaret wrote about how she could still hear their voices and footsteps in the house. She described the knocking sound that had haunted us. The last entry was particularly chilling. "They won't leave me alone. The knocking never stops. I fear for my sanity." Julie and I were horrified. We decided to leave the house immediately and moved in with my parents until we could find a new place. We never went back to that old Victorian house. We later learned that it had a long history of paranormal activity, and that several families had left abruptly, just like us. The house still stands today, abandoned and shrouded in mystery, with the knocking sound continuing to echo through its empty halls.